Hello and welcome to HCB, where today, for the first time, we are going to be going through all 10 fixtures this weekend and deciding what I think will happen in them. In other words, we're predicting them. It's week 10 and there are a lot of features within the games this week. A game that is over 10 years in the making. It's potentially hard away games for some of the top 6 sides. A battle between 2 of the top 6 at the moment. And of course, Liverpool versus Spurs. Sorry, Spurs fans. To start off with, we have Friday night football in Southampton versus Leicester. And before you ask, no, I have no idea why this is on Friday. It seems like it could easily be on Saturday, but I suppose for these two sides, you have to get the quota up when it comes to games. When it comes to games on TV. Southampton coming off a draw against Wolves last week, which is a decent result away from home, leaving them in 17th, while Leicester come off a slightly controversial win over Burnley 2-1 at the King Power. Both teams have had very contrasting starts. I know we're talking a little bit of how I believe both teams have started. And actually, to be fair, slightly contrasting starts is a bit of an understatement considering one is 17th and one is 3rd. Southampton have looked good in patches, I believe, so far this season. Like their patch of beating, they had a good patch of around 4 games where they lost to Liverpool at home, but it was only 2-1, and they did actually quite look decent in that game. And then they beat Brighton away from home 2-0. They drew with Man United at home, and then they beat Sheffield United 1-0 away. That was a good patch of form. However, since then they haven't won in 4, and that draw against Wolves ended a 3-game losing run. And to be fair, that run I talked about earlier came after losing 3-0 away at Burnley on the opening day. Meanwhile, Leicester have had a decent. I say decent. What am I talking about? They've had a really good start to the season, obviously. Only losing to Liverpool and Man United. People obviously at the start of the season, and they're still saying it now, are saying that Leicester can break that top 6 this year. Even they're saying Leicester can break into the top 4. I'm not convinced yet. I believe they are slightly benefiting from the likes of Spurs and Man United, and even to an extent Chelsea in the early part of this season, in the early stages of this season, from dropping a little bit. I believe Leicester still are capable of having that slight drop. And I think that some of the results have been exaggerated, for example. Like, take the Newcastle game. People were raving about them then, saying that they can do good things. However, it was a 5-0 win, which on paper is a good result, but it was against the Newcastle side at home, who were down to 10 men and struggled defensively anyway. So I don't see how that makes them a big side by doing that. And even their supposedly good wins, like their 2-1 win against Spurs, it's come against the Spurs side, who we will obviously talk about later when it comes to their game on Sunday, who haven't won a away game, since January in the Prem. So even then, you could sort of say Leicester are a little bit favourites, even if they were a mid-table side, which they were last year. Having said that, the last time these two met was in a 2-1 win to Southampton at the King Power. In fact, last year both teams traded away wins 2-1. Last year, Leicester winning in August at St Mary's, while Southampton got the win back in January at the King Power. However, you've got to say, I'm going to say Leicester are probably the favourites here, especially if you consider the fact that Southampton haven't won a home game yet this year, only picking up a point actually at home, and that was against Man United, losing their other 3 games against Bournemouth, Chelsea, and Liverpool, which are hard games, but you still need to be picking up more points, I believe, at home this season, especially if you are in a relegation fight, which Southampton potentially are. Injury-wise, Leicester haven't really got too many injury concerns. They've got Matt James obviously ruled out, but the only injury concern slightly is James Maddison might not be able to play the full game. However, should be able to start. But Southampton, on the other hand, Gineppo, their new signing from this year, has a thigh injury. He is ruled out for the game, which is, and Cedric Suarez has a heel injury. He is a 50%. He's 50% likely to play, which is a concern considering that takes out their right hand side. Especially with Musa Gineppo, considering he's actually been one of their bright sparks this year, actually winning the games again, their two wins, getting the winners in Southampton in the for Southampton. I mean, against Brighton and Sheffield United, he's been a very valuable asset to Southampton. However, saying that, I mean, despite it's always tricky to predict the top six sides on in away games against rigid teams a bit like Southampton, I do think Leicester are going to win this one. I'm going to say it'll be 2-0 Leicester. Up next, we have the early kickoff on Saturday. That is Manchester City versus Aston Villa. Manchester City coming off their 2-0 win against Crystal Palace last week with two quick goals in the first half, securing a 2-0 win. Meanwhile, Villa are coming off back-to-back victories, with the most recent one being a home win in the last minute with a last-minute goal against Brighton. To be fair, they did have a goal ruled out for VAR slightly unfairly in that game, so they probably would have gone on to win. They probably should have gone on to win that one anyway. Injury-wise, for both sides, Man City are still obviously without Leroy Sané. Zinchenko has been ruled out for this game, which means Mendy will play. This is an interesting one. Rodri is out for this game. He's currently being assessed, but by the looks of it, he will be out. And of course, Emerick Laporte is ruled out. John Stones could make his start, which, to be fair, in my slightly biased opinion, I believe will actually give Villa an advantage if he plays. Villa still only with one injury, Jose Pelotero. If someone could tell me who that is, I'd be thrilled to know. But I don't fit when it comes to their main starting 11. All are fit at the moment. Villa obviously moved up to 12th last week with that win against Brighton, contemplating a rather poor start to the life back in the Prem, which is to be expected considering the amount of players they signed. Meanwhile, City are second and have closed the gap a little bit on Liverpool after Liverpool dropped points against Man United. When it comes to the actual game itself, most people are probably expecting City to win. However, I think they're also expecting them to win by quite a hefty margin, which I would disagree with. Villa, with City's defensive problems still, with the likes of John Stones and Otamendi not performing, and even having to bring in Fernandinho and Rodri last week. He's obviously not likely to play this week. It's a concern, and especially when you've got someone like Wesley coming up against him, who's a big physical player and can easily outmuscle those three players, I believe, especially if he's up against someone like Fernandinho, where he's got a major height advantage. He could cause a problem, especially for Villa on the counter-attack. He could hold the ball up and potentially pass it out. I actually think this, while I believe City will win, I think Villa will give them a very big scare, and it will be a good game to watch on BT early kickoff. I'm not being sponsored by BT, don't worry. Imagine 2 videos in, I get sponsored by a big company, or just anyone. What was I? Etihad. So Man City Villa. I believe it will be 3-2 to Manchester City. Up next, we have Brighton versus Everton. Everton coming off a win against West Ham in the early kickoff last week, 2-0. To break their run of 4 without a point, not just a win, a point. Meanwhile, Brighton conceding a last-minute goal to Aston Villa last week away from home, cementing them to another loss, meaning they have only won 1 in their last 7, 1 in the last 8 actually. That being Spurs. For some reason, they can only win 3-0. So if you want to, Brighton, there's the message. If you want to win, you got to actually destroy the team. Injury-wise for both sides, Brighton will be without Aaron Moy. He's obviously not injured, but he's suspended after getting sent off against Villa. Esquerdo is still out. with a knee injury, and Bernardo is also out, still out, obviously with a knee injury. Who thought knee injury would be such a hard phrase to say? Everton, meanwhile, still obviously got Gabaman out until potentially 2020 with a thigh injury. Czech Tosin's a 25% chance to play, even though he's like fourth choice striker. I doubt he would play anyway. Morgan Schneiderlin is a 50% chance to play. Yerry Mina with a knee injury is a 50% chance to play as well as Fabian Delph, 50% chance with a thigh injury. With regards to the game, with regards to previous meetings between the two sides, Brighton have won one get out of their last 4 games, which is the amount they've played since Brighton have been back in the Premier League. Brighton have won 1, Everton have won 2, and they've drawn 1. However, every win has come at home. Since the first time these met, when it was 1-1, the home side has always won. With the most recent result coming when Brighton beat Everton in late December last year, 1-0. Having said that, having seen the results, I believe usually when teams come off beating a side after a poor run of form, as Everton have done, they usually come after it with a draw. So I think that's what's going to happen. Also, they're very close in the league, 15th versus 16th. I don't think either side would mind a draw. Potentially, I mean, I could be wrong. Brighton maybe would want a home win. They could see there's a chance to win. However, I believe it will end in a score draw, 1-1. Up next, we go to Vicarage Road as winless Watford, which is a name someone has probably copyrighted somewhere because it's got alliteration, take on Bournemouth. Now, all I can say is when it comes to these two sides, you expect goals because last 3 meetings there's been a minimum of 4 goals each, with them finishing 2-2 in March 2018, 4-0 Bournemouth in October 2018, and who can forget the 2nd of January game 2019 where these sides drew 3-3 and it was 3-3 at half time. Where basically I remember being at a West Ham game. If you don't know, I'm a West Ham fan. Playing Brighton, and my every second breath was saying that Watford or Bournemouth had scored a goal. It was good fun, considering I'm pretty sure I predicted a draw for that one. When it comes to the last result, Watford came so close to their first win of the season, drawing 1-1 against Spurs, with a cross of bad defending / bad VAR, in my opinion. I don't believe that Dele Alli goal should have stood, costing them their first win. Meanwhile, Bournemouth coming off a 0-0 draw with Norwich, and if you've already forgotten about that game, I do not blame you. It was boring. But both sides, however, despite the lack of goals both teams scored last week, 1 in total, which to be fair, Watford will take. When it comes to the actual games themselves, as I said, they've been high-scoring affairs. So I would expect goals. Bit of a spoiler for what I'm predicting for this. Injury-wise, Watford obviously still have their main captain out, Troy Deeney, which I believe, going back to their form, has been a big factor as to why they haven't got a win yet. They need a bit of leadership in that side, Watford, and they don't have it. Isaac Success, a 25% chance of playing. Sebastian Prodo, a 50% chance with a thigh injury. Etienne Capoue, 25% chance with a lower back injury. And Danny Welbeck, you'll never guess it, he's injured. Ruled out with a thigh injury. With regards to Bournemouth, they have got 5 injuries as well themselves. Dan Gosling is ruled out for the game. He's been out for a long time. He's coming back in November, as is David Brooks. Jefferson Lerma, 50% chance of playing after a groin injury. Charlie Daniels is ruled out with a knee injury, as well as Junior Stanislas. With regards to the game itself, another factor you've got to look at when looking at the recent fixtures between the two sides is there have been a lot of draws. In the last 8 times they've played each other, which I believe is when both sides got to the Premier League. Both sides got to the Premier League. Watford have won 1 away from home. Bournemouth have won 1 away from home, but there have been 6 draws. And for me, you cannot look past that amount. These sides have been very even. And to be fair, especially considering the confidence I believe Watford should and hopefully will get after drawing at Spurs, I believe they will take that and create another draw at home at Vicarage Road. I'm going to say this one will end 2-2, partly because neither team can really defend either. So it's going to be a score draw. It should be entertaining for people of match of the day. In other words, if you want to watch your match, if you want for people whose team will win at the weekend and actually will watch this game. Up next, we have West Ham, my team, of course, versus Sheffield United. As I said, this match is more than 10 years in the making. If you don't know what I mean by that, I'm referring to back in 2007. I want to say, yeah, 2007. It was obviously it was very tight between us two, which would get relegated. Ultimately, we survived. They went down, and a lot of people are saying it was unfair due to Carlos Tevez, obviously contributing to a lot of our goals, keeping us up. And it was an illegal transfer. Whether you like it or not, it shouldn't have happened through third party. It shouldn't have happened. However, I'm not complaining. I'm not complaining. West Ham coming off 2 losses back to back, but the most recent one being I'll be honest, very poor performance against Everton, losing 2-0. Apologies if you can hear any background noise. Meanwhile, Sheffield United coming off a very good win against Arsenal 1-0, which, to be fair, I actually predicted. I've got no evidence of that, but just trust me, I did actually Sheffield United to beat Arsenal. Another injury-wise, West Ham will still mainly have just long-term injuries at the moment, with Aaron Cresswell 50% chance of playing with a groin injury. Winston Reid obviously ruled out, along with Mikel Antonio and Lucas Fabianski. Sheffield United, on the other hand, don't have any injuries going into this one, so they've got a full squad lined up. With regards to both starts to the season, West Ham, and I will try and be as fair as possible, we've had a better start than last year, which got us in the hunt for Europe, which I believe is a positive when it comes to West Ham. We've lost our last 2 games. We've not played well, and especially our cup exit against Oxford was very bad. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. However, you've got to say we've improved since last year, with the likes of Allaire performing well, Declan Rice carrying on. And to be fair, I think we're being... and to be fair, obviously you could point the losses potentially at Lucas Fabianski being injured. I don't think Roberto's had much. The 4 goals he's conceded, Roberto, I don't think he could have done much about them. Maybe one of them, but he's made also some good saves as well. Sheffield United have had, to be fair, a very good start. A lot of people were writing them off at the start of the year. I wasn't one of them. I actually predicted them to stay up, and I believe that will still happen. I will probably say my start predictions at some point during this, maybe next week during the review show. But one key factor Sheffield United have had is they are still unbeaten away from home. Despite only winning once against Everton, they've got draws against Bournemouth, Chelsea and Watford. The Watford one, maybe you could say, is a bit questionable, but it's still a good record to have. And especially considering they're away now, as you can imagine, as a West Ham fan, I'm thrilled they've still got that record. It makes it very, very wonderful for me and fills me with confidence. With regards to the score, I believe that potentially Sheffield United style of play could hurt West Ham, in the sense that with their centre-backs coming forward, they could run us in the midfield, which is a concern. However, I believe after West Ham's performance against Everton, they need something to prove. They have something to prove. They have to win this, I believe, in the sense that to get back to the fans, to give them hope again, and with that sense of our next 2 games I know are coming up are both home, that we need to, if we are to challenge for that top 6, top 7, we need to be winning home games against sides like Sheffield United. I believe it will be close, but partly because I've gone for a lot of draws also this week, I'm going to say West Ham will edge it 2-1. You can disagree, you can say I'm biased. I think that will be the case. And I can't wait for Monday where I have to say I was completely wrong and Sheffield United beat us 4-0. I really hope that doesn't happen. Up next, we have the late kickoff on Saturday as Burnley take on Chelsea. Burnley, both teams have had decent starts to the season. Chelsea coming off a home 1-0 home win against Newcastle, keeping their second clean sheet. Of course, they are also coming off their Champions League win yesterday against Ajax, which was a very good performance, probably Frank Lampard's best as Chelsea manager. Meanwhile, Burnley coming off a unlucky loss against Leicester 2-1 at the King Power, as I stated earlier. It was very controversial. In my opinion, they should have got the draw out of that. For pure and pretty simple, I don't think Johnny Evans was fouled enough. Excuse me. For the goal to be ruled out. It's as simple as that. They should have probably drawn that. However, I have been very impressed with Burnley this year, and for me, they are outside bets for a top half finish. When you talk about wins, like the Southampton one, where they win on the opening day 3-0, and wins against Everton and Norwich, decent teams. Not to mention draws against away draws against Villa, Brighton, and Wolves, all decent results. And to be fair, the only losses they've had are against big sides. They narrowly lost to Arsenal. They did get a little bit thumped by Liverpool, despite never really being out of the game. And as I mentioned earlier, they had a controversial loss to Leicester last week. With regards to Chelsea, if I had done this start of September, I would have said Chelsea have not performed well. However, since September, they've only lost one game to Liverpool and have won the rest. So to be fair, despite the start, Frank Lampard has turned this team around and he's actually investing in the youth, which I believe is good. To be fair, he's made Tammy Abraham an excellent striker, which, considering the last time I saw him in the Prem, he was at Swansea and couldn't score a goal to save his life. It's a vast improvement. And to be fair, this will be one of Chelsea's trickiest games, I believe. This one, for the simple reason Burnley are a rigid side, and they are always a hard team to play for the top six, especially at home. If you look at the likes of Arsenal this year, I mean, they're narrowly scraping a win. Man City last year relying on what was it, 2 point, like a couple of centimeters to get the win. They are a tough side to crack, and I think that's even more this year. However, if you go to recent form between the two, they've only picked up one win in the last 10 against Chelsea. That coming on the opening day of the 2017-18 season, where they won 3-2, which was actually quite a fun win to watch for a neutral, considering Chelsea were coming off as champions. However, I believe if Chelsea had lost to Ajax or not performed well, I would have said Burnley could draw this or even nick a win. However, I believe the confidence Chelsea will gain from that win will see them through to win this one as well. And I'm going to say it will be 1-0 to Chelsea. Now we move on to the Sunday games, and the first one up is Newcastle versus Wolves. I'd probably say it's the least interesting of the Sunday games. Apologies for any Newcastle or Wolves fans. That might be watching this, but even you've got to admit, if you look at the other three, it's probably the least interesting. Wolves, obviously, tonight. I'm recording this on a Thursday, as you can probably guess. Wolves tonight are playing in the Europa League. I'm not sure how much impact that will have on my prediction, unless they get thrashed or win big potentially. I'm not sure. I don't think if I did it after it would change my prediction. However, Newcastle obviously coming off a loss to Chelsea last weekend, 1-0. Wolves coming off a 1-1 draw against Southampton after beating City 2-0 at the Etihad, which is City's actually biggest gap of loss since Pep Guardiola's title-winning season. Look it up, that is actually true. Having said that, both sides, I think, struggle. Wolves, I think, have had a decent start to the season. However, they have only won 2 games. Admittedly, one was against City, the other was against Watford, but we'll give them the bye there, but because City was a good result. And I think one of the key features of Wolves' play this year is they haven't lost many games. They've only lost, despite them being what 19th only a couple of weeks ago. They haven't lost games. They've only lost two, and that was to Everton and Chelsea. Admittedly, the Chelsea loss was bad, but if you consider they've managed to nick draws against Leicester, Man United, Burnley, Palace, all sides which are on good form at the moment, it hasn't been a bad start, I believe, for Wolves. If you go to Newcastle, I think, despite being 18th, their start is a lot better than people expected, myself included. Um, I think they have played better. I think they've played well. Their two wins against Spurs and Man United are good wins, despite both teams' form. They're very good wins, especially the Spurs one when away from home, getting their first points of the year. However, you can't look past some of the other results they've had, especially the 3-1 loss to Norwich and the 5-0 loss to Leicester, where both times they did just collapse, and especially other times when they just looked abject. I'm pretty sure at home against Brighton they drew 0-0. But you got to take into effect that Brighton had like most of possession. I'm pretty sure it was like at the very least it was 60-40, maybe even 65-35, which you can't have at home against Brighton. No matter who you are, Brighton are not at that level where you can have that much possession. Injury wise for both sides, Newcastle are looking Newcastle are looking at Florent Lejeune ruled out. She's been ruled out for quite a while. Andy Carroll's got a 25% chance of playing. Of course he does. Isaac Hayden is ruled out for still being suspended after that sending off against Leicester. Fabian Schär, 50% chance of playing as well, which is actually potentially be a big blow for Newcastle if he doesn't play. And Matt Ritchie has a 25% chance of playing as well. Wolves, on the other hand, have two injuries. Neto is a 25% chance of playing through a heel injury, and Ryan Bennett is ruled out as well with a groin injury. With regards to the actual game itself, if you go on their recent history, it's pretty even actually when it comes to results. We'll go from when they played each other last year in the Premier League. The last time they played each other at St James's Park, Wolves got a last-minute winner to secure a 2-1 victory. The last time they played full stop was in February this year, where it was a 1-1 draw. With regards to this result, I believe it won't be a great game from an attacking standpoint. Defensively, I think both teams will be solid, and I'm going to say that it's going to be a 0-0 draw. For the pure fact, I believe Wolves will probably do more of the attacking, but Newcastle will shut them out. And I will actually say this: I'm predicting 0-0 draw. If Wolves get an early goal, they could easily score like 3 or 4. So bear that in mind if that potentially happens. So I don't look like an idiot if there's a lot of goals. Definitely not doing that to cover up. Up next, as I've just pointed out, it is Arsenal versus Palace, London derby, with both sides sitting in the top 6 with Arsenal in 5th, Palace in 6th. Obviously, you've got to say both teams have had a decent start, despite coming off losses last week. Arsenal coming in the form of a 1-0 loss to Sheffield United, while Crystal Palace's was a 2-0 loss against Man City. With regards to Arsenal's starts to this season, they've looked better than last year. I think we can confirm that. Their wins coming. However, they haven't beaten any of the big sides yet, with their wins coming against Newcastle, Burnley, Villa and Bournemouth. That will be a concern for them, considering they've already played 3 of the supposed top 6, only taking 2 points, with 2 of them being Spurs and Man United, neither of which is on good form. Having said that, they have only lost 2 games, with the most recent coming against Sheffield United, and the other being a 3-1 loss at Anfield to Liverpool. So, and with regards to Palace, obviously, they have had a tremendous start themselves, being in 6th place. However, I do think it will run out soon, because if you look at their fixtures, when it comes to the actual table, other than City, the highest team they've played in the league is Spurs, who are 7th. So other than City, they have played no one above them in the league at this moment in time. The wins have been and also if you look at who they've beaten and how it's a bit, it doesn't help them, I don't think, because if you look, the first one was against Man United. That was a good win. I will say that, but it's not the Man United of old. The next one was not Palace, Aston Villa, which they shouldn't have won. Let's be honest, that should have been a draw. The Henry Lansbury goal should have stood. I believe that the only reason that didn't stand was because they can't have Henry Lansbury scoring in the Prem in 2019. The third came against Norwich, which to this day still haven't picked up, still have only picked up 1 point away from home. And the other was against West Ham, where I was at the game and we created enough chances to win. Palace probably deserved the win, but at the same time, on another day, we could have easily won that. I will say Palace's style of play as well, I don't think is up to date enough to compete against these top six sides. Because if you look at how they play, they pretty much just hoof the ball up from goal kicks, hope Zaha does something, or get a free kick or a penalty to score their goals. And it sounds like I'm being harsh. They've scored out of their last four goals, at least 3 of them have been from set pieces. It's a simple fact. At the end of the day. With that being said, obviously last time these two teams played, Palace went out 3-2 winners at the Emirates with Christian Benteke scoring his first goal in what seems like forever. I think it was 18 months. There is obviously one major difference in this game, and that is Shotgun Mustafi is not able to play. I mean he's fit, but he's just not able to play. Meaning David Luiz and Socrates will be the partnership. And I know Arsenal have had troubles defensively, but if they can maintain Palace's, dare I say, fairly simple attacking tactics, and get forward on the break and get forward and cause trouble, especially with Lacazette coming back, and he'll probably get a lot more minutes than he did against Sheffield United, and dare I say start with also the likes of Kieran Tierney and Hector Bellerin probably helping from the wing. It's going to be very hard for Palace to contain that, and I'm actually going to say, while I believe Palace will get maybe a goal from a set piece or something, a free kick, Arsenal are going to come out winners in this one, and I'm going to say it will be 3-1. Next up, it is Tottenham versus Liverpool at Anfield, and where to start with Tottenham's season? Before I start speaking, I know they beat Red Star Belgrade 5-0 the week. I know. But you've got to look at Premier League form in this, with it being Red Star Belgrade. And the fact is, Spurs have not been good for their standards. They just haven't. It's a simple fact. Their points have cut. Their wins have come against Villa, Palace, and Southampton. And look, the Palace one's not too bad, but there's caveats to both wins. I mean, the Villa win came last minute, with both goals coming from past the 85th minute mark, and the Southampton win came with pretty much Lloris's ability to just make a load of saves, ironically, despite pretty much giving Southampton a goal in the meantime. With regards to Liverpool, obviously they dropped point. Both teams, and Spurs actually, both teams took a 1-1 draw last week in very different circumstances. Liverpool took it at Old Trafford. Spurs scored a last-minute goal, which again I stated earlier probably shouldn't have counted, against bottom place Watford. Despite Spurs' bad form, and this is partly leading into my point against Leicester, saying teams have been slightly bad. Despite their bad form, they are still 7th. They are still technically in a Europa League spot, which has got to be some kind of positive for teams like Spurs, for teams around them as well, like Sheffield United, Bournemouth, and West Ham. Those teams that are also on level on points, they are still close to that area. Liverpool obviously still top with slightly less margin than before the United game. With regards to injuries, Shaqiri has been ruled out with a heel injury for Liverpool. Trent Alexander-Arnold's got a 50% chance of playing. Joel Matip has got a 50% chance with a knee injury, and Nathaniel Klein is ruled out with a knee injury as well. On the Spurs side, their injury list is getting less by the week, with Ryan Sessegnon's a 25% chance of him playing with a thigh injury, and obviously Hugo Lloris is ruled out until at least the new year, which some Spurs fans will say that's a benefit for them. Others, take your pick. The concerning thing for Spurs, I think, in this one, there's two concerning things, I would say. One is the simple fact that they haven't won a away game since January. Plain and simple, and they're coming up against the top team in the league at the moment. It's actually three things, to be fair, this, as well. The third one is this is a repeat of the Champions League final. They will probably still have that loss hanging over their head, and I believe part of the reason why they've struggled is they've still got that loss hanging over their head. And the third thing, if you look at the history between the two sides, Spurs have only won once in their last 10 meetings. Now, they have drawn 4 of them, with Liverpool only winning 5. That part isn't too bad. But considering Spurs' last win came in 2017 in October, it's not good. It's very concerning for Spurs. And I will say this. Liverpool, I don't think are going to thrash Spurs. They're not going to thrash them. I partly because I made that mistake last week predicting Liverpool to win 4-0 against Man United. They didn't. But also, Spurs, and also Liverpool, I think, they don't thrash the supposed top 6. The only team they've done that to is Arsenal at Anfield. The others they've won or drawn. The others they have drawn or won, but they've won by like 1. That's a lot of ones, I'll tell you that. However, I do think, which is sort of leading on to my prediction, I believe that Liverpool will win this game, but it will only be 2-1. And I will say this, if Liverpool do thrash Spurs, I think a lot of people are going to want Pochettino out. A lot of people do at the moment, but a lot more are going to want Pochettino out if they get thrashed by Liverpool in particular. I mean, at the end of the day, a loss to Liverpool could see them drop out of the top half, which would be terrible for their standards, considering we will be 10 games in. Final game of this week comes at Carrow Road as Norwich play Manchester United. Both teams are coming off draws. Norwich coming off their 0-0 draw against Bournemouth, which, to be fair, they will take. It's their first point away from home this year, leaving them in 19th. Meanwhile, Man United sit in 14th after a 1-0 draw against Liverpool, which, again, despite winning, will take, considering, again, I'm going to mention VAR because it was horrific last week. Their goal probably shouldn't have counted because it was a foul in the build-up. With regards to injuries for both sides, Norwich have got Tim Closer out until 2020, obviously. I won't mention all of these every week, it's just because it's the first one. Zimmerman out till 2020. Grant Hanley ruled out. Varanic, 25% chance of playing with a calf injury. And Ralph Farman, a 50% chance of playing with a groin injury. With regards to Man United's injuries, Eric Bailly ruled out with a knee injury and has been ruled out for a while. Paul Pogba ruled out still with an ankle injury. Tuanzebe ruled out after being injured in the warm-up against Liverpool. Nemanja Matic is ruled out as well, along with Timothy Fosu-Mensah and Diego Dalot. With regards to both teams' start, it's been, I mean, where do I start? There's a lot of things to go on about. Norwich, I think, are performing to the standard I predicted them to. I mean, I actually predicted them to get relegated this year. You'll probably find out more why, but especially that 5-1 loss against Villa. That was the Norwich I thought was going to come up. The Norwich that would be decent that wouldn't adapt attacking-wise to the Prem, despite being very good at attacking the Championship, but still really struggling defensively when it comes, like since the City loss especially, this is the most damning stat. They have conceded, since the City loss, they've got 1 point against Bournemouth. I mean, they've played 4 games well. They've got 1 point against Bournemouth. They've lost 3 games. They've conceded 9 and only scored 1, and that was a consolation against Villa, which it really meant nothing. That goal, it was just a nice moment for Joseph Dermot to get his opening goal. I mean, obviously their wins have been good. The win against City was obviously tremendous. It was brilliant. The win against Newcastle was also a good win as well. But their losses have just been so condemning, especially considering they haven't really played any of the big sides apart from Liverpool away from home. They've only played us. Yes, I am criticizing, and yes, I am parring my own team, Palace and Burnley, all of which they lost convincingly 2-0. And in any of the cases, it could have been more. Man United, on the other hand, I mean, where do we start? The fact that we are a quarter of the way through the season and they are only 2 points above the relegation zone is shocking. And considering that there is potential that they could be in the relegation zone after this week, it is absolutely atrocious from a Man United standpoint. And it's been coming a long time. I mean, their form this season, that I think the fact they've got a lot of draws has helped them. Uh, like keep going, especially Solskjaer. Like the draws against Liverpool and Arsenal, they're decent results. But when considering you lose convincingly to the three losses as well, however, though, have not been good. They lost to Palace at Old Trafford, despite probably dominating the game and Palace just snatch and grab win. The loss against Newcastle was poor, especially considering they came off a 5-0 loss themselves, Newcastle. And the loss against West Ham was poor simply because it was quite convincing for West Ham. Uh, it's as simple as that. And also the draw. Their issue, I think, at the moment for Man United is goals. They haven't scored. They haven't scored more than one goal since the opening day against Chelsea, where it was obviously 4-0. But the fact that they've got, in my opinion, their best area is probably their attacking. When it comes to like a starting 11 of Martial, Rashford, and James, it's a good attacking lineup. The fact that they're only managing it's less than a goal a game. Let's be honest, it's less than a goal a game. Is poor. It's incredibly poor and should not be happening for Man United. I will say this: if despite the result against Liverpool, if they lose this game, Solskjaer has to go. Simple as that. If they lose this game, he has to go. However, and you've got to remember the last time Norwich did welcome a Manchester side to Carrow Road was Manchester City, where they did win 3-2. So they probably got that in the back of their minds, both sides, for better or worse. However, having said that, I believe Man United will probably catch them like once on the counter attack with Norwich's dodgy defence. And with Norwich's poor goal scoring form, I'm not sure how they will respond to that. So I'm going to play it slightly safe, and I'm going to say Man United will win this game 1-0. Now, that's all the games done. Let's go over to my fantasy team. As I said, I'm going to go through my fantasy team each week to say what I've got. Obviously, this is the first week I have done this. So you won't know this, but this is an unchanged side from last week. So I've got Schmeichel in goal. I've got Robertson, Sonihue, Otamendi at the back three. Then Donker, De Bruyne, Mane, and Hudson-Odoi in midfield with Firmino, Allaire, and Aubameyang up front. But De Bruyne is captain purely because he's playing Villa, and I think out of my main players, he is most likely to get goals. Aubameyang is vice captain; he's second most likely. On my bench, I've got Button, who's really, you know how people have a 4-mil keeper just to make up to improve funds elsewhere. Lundstrom, Coleman, and Kante. I'll be honest, the main reason I got Lundstrom on my bench is to have confidence in West Ham. Because if I put him on there as a defender, I'm sort of saying, oh, well, West Ham probably won't score, which is a bit harsh. With regards to potential areas of weakness, Otamendi is a concern. I was considering transferring him out this week, but considering there was no one really available for that price, I thought keep him in, see if he actually plays, and then make the decision after when you've got 2 free transfers. Overall, in my main league I'm second out of 7. I will say if other people want me to mention how the other teams are doing in my league, let me know. Mainly the other 6 people in there. That would be a test if they watch my video. That'll be up to the end. That'll be a good test. But other than that, I'll obviously let you know how this side does at the weekend, and I'll let you know how Lundstrom and Coleman probably both have a hat-trick to their name. With that, now, as I say that will be the end of the first predictions. As I said, this will be a lot, as I said earlier in the introduction, it's obviously a lot longer than the intro, mainly because I want to go in depth on each team and say, each team, and say my thoughts on them. So I hope you appreciate this style with a lot of in-depth sort of analysis, I want to say. I'm putting some thought into the games. And that will conclude the first predictions video. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you like and potentially subscribe. And obviously, And as I said in the last one, comment any areas of debate you want me to talk about in the review on Monday.